Welcome to the Opening School's last episode of the year, in which we've picked a game from the FIDE Grand Prix tournament in Tashkent. The game was played in the 7th round between the Super Grandmasters Ruslan Ponomariov from Ukraine and Israeli Boris Gelfand.
There's a risk in chess of feeling limited by the opening stage of the game. You feel that you have to play a mainstream opening in order to even reach the middle game with an equal position. But since your opponents know theory at least as well as you do, all games leads to basically the same positions.
In order to avoid this, players sometimes look into less well-known variations, hoping to capture their opponent off guard. Unfortunately, though, there is usually a reason for a variation not being popular in the first place. They usually leave you at a disadvantage if the opponent manages to find the right moves. So it's really a question of if you're willing to risk it and hope that the opponent will not know the exact correct continuation. It's certainly quite a bind, so what do you do, Alfred?
Well, the trick is to avoid flashy openings, because they often focus on looking good instead of actually being any good. This might sound strange, but the fact is that attacks are extremely hard to pull off. Not only do you need to coordinate all of your pieces, but you also need an accessible weakness that you can exploit.
And there are not many of those if your opponent at least knows to some extent what he's doing. What you actually should do is very well illustrated in today's game. So let us take a look at it. Ponomariov opened up by playing e4, against which Gelfand decided to play c5, leading us into the Sicilian defense, one of the most popular openings in the world. The game continued with knight to f3 and knight to c6, and if we think mainstream, we're somewhere in the middle of it right now.
But this is where Ponomariov decided to play bishop to b5 instead of the extremely common d4. Note that bishop to b5 is also quite popular. It is a simple move, but it takes you far off the course from what would have happened after d4. Now e6 followed, and then castle kingside, knight g to e7, rook to e1, and knight to d4.
You can barely compare this line to the usual Sicilian. Instead of focusing on capturing the center as quickly as possible, followed by a lot of stabilizing moves, White has chosen a rather solid development without weaknesses, but without any clear goals either. But that's not much of a problem, since the reason behind White's weak attack is that he simply has not developed his position yet, and the same goes for Black, of course. After this, White exchanged knights on d4, followed by c3. Alfred, what should Black do here?
Well, you might be tempted to exchange on c3, especially since the pawn on d4 can't be protected by playing e5. To exchange on c3 is not good, since it would lead to White getting total control over the center. Instead, Black should play a6, forcing away the White bishop, in this case to f1, followed by knight to c6. White should of course not capture on d4. Instead, Ponomariov chose to develop his knight by placing it on a3. This was followed by bishop to c5, b4, bishop to a7, rook to b1, and castle kingside.
The white position here might seem, well, maybe not terrible, but weird enough not to be good. A knight on a3 and a pawn on b4 are not typically part of the ideal opening development.
Right, but after b5, a takes on b5, knight takes on b5, bishop to c5, bishop to b2, and an exchange on c3, we have reached a position full of possibilities, and the previously odd development has actually become quite comfortable.
So, what should you take with you from this game? Well, if you continue on the theme of playing unusual openings, I would say that the most important thing is to find a solid variation and not to deviate too far from the most popular lines. But if you choose the slightly less popular moves, you will reach a very different opening than you usually do without losing stability. Of course, we recommend you to go through the entire game as always, but with that, we will end this year's last episode of the Opening School. See you again next year.